engage, Taylor. That is a direct order.
Breathing heavily.
Commander, he has the detonator. I have eyes on the target. Stand down.
Taylor! Acknowledge!
Do not engage Taylor. That is a direct order. The voice in her earpiece crackled, distorted by the jamming signal, but unmistakable in its fury. Lieutenant Commander Stone wasn't just shouting, he was unraveling. Sergeant Isabella Taylor lay prone in the dust and insulation of a bombed-out minaret, her cheek pressed against the composite stock of her M110 SAS. Through the scope, the world was a heat haze of amber thermal imaging. 600 yards out, wind holding steady at 4 miles per hour, full value left to right. Commander, he has the detonator, Isabella whispered, her voice a flat line of calm against the chaos on the radio. If he keys that mic, your entire stack is gone. I have eyes on the target. It's a civilian holding a radio, Stone roared. You fire and I will personally court-martial you before the brass hits the floor. Do you hear me? Stand down. Isabella's finger hovered over the trigger. She could see what Stone couldn't, the wire running from the man's sleeve to the device buried under the rubble where Stone's team was taking cover. She remembered the feeling of Stone's saliva hitting her cheek 3 hours ago, the heat of his disrespect, the sheer weight of his arrogance. If I take this shot, my career ends. If I don't, they all die. She exhaled. The reticle settled between the target's eyes. Taylor acknowledged transmission breaks. Static. 10 hours earlier, Al-Kabir Province, unnamed forward operating base. The ramp of the MH-47 Chinook lowered into the swirling dust, revealing a landscape that looked like the surface of a dead moon. There was no moon tonight, only the oppressive, suffocating dark of the valley floor. Go! 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 The jumpmaster's voice was barely audible over the whine of the twin rotors. Sergeant Isabella Taylor adjusted the strap of her pack, the weight of the M110 SAS rifle familiar and grounding against her chest. She moved with the fluid, ghost-like precision of a predator stepping off the ramp and into the brownout, the blinding cloud of sand kicked up by the bird. As her boots crunched onto the gravel, her world turned monochromatic. Through the dual tubes of her white phosphor NVGs, the desert was a sharp, crisp grayscale. She scanned her sector immediately left flank, high ridge. Clear. Havoc actual, this is Havoc 1. Boots dry, moving to waypoint Alpha. Lieutenant Commander Stone's voice cut through her comms. It was tight-clipped, carrying an edge of irritation that had been there since the briefing back at base. Copy 1, keep spacing tight. Stone added, his voice dropping an octave. And Taylor, keep up. I don't want to be dragging a sniper's ghillie suit out of my rotor wash. Isabella didn't respond verbally. She clicked her mic twice, affirmative. She was already moving her pace, matching the SEALs ahead of her, though her eyes were doing work they weren't. While the direct action guys focused on the path and the immediate threat of IEDs, Isabella was dissecting the shadows 300 meters out. The team moved in a staggered column. They were 5 miles from the city limits of Al-Marak, a sprawling labyrinth of mud brick and concrete where a high-value target was waiting to defect. Picking up the pace, Stone ordered. We're burning daylight. Isabella checked her wrist GPS. They were ahead of schedule. Pushing this fast in this terrain was reckless. The wadi dry riverbed they were traversing was a natural choke point. Commander, Isabella spoke, her voice low. Request we hold for a thermal scan of the ridgeline. Terrain features don't match the satellite int. Denied, Stone snapped instantly. Intel says this sector is cold. We treat it as transit. Pick it up. Isabella clenched her jaw. The ROE, Rules of Engagement, strictly forbade engagement without PID, positive identification, but the rules of survival dictated that you never trusted intel that was more than 6 hours old. She kept moving, but she shifted her rifle, bringing the thermal optic to her eye. The world shifted from grayscale to a spectrum of heat. The rocks were cooling, showing up as dull purple and black. The scrub brush was blue. Then she saw it. 400 meters up, nestled in a crag of the cliff face. A tiny rhythmic pulse of orange. It wasn't a rock. Rocks didn't breathe. Contact, left side ridge. 400 meters, Isabella whispered, halting. The column stopped. Stone marched back down the line, his silhouette looming large in her NVGs. What are you seeing, Taylor? Heat signature, rhythmic. Looks like a spotter under a thermal blanket. The blanket is leaking heat at the seams. Stone pulled out his monocular, scanning the ridge for 3 seconds. It's a goat, Taylor, or a stray dog. See how it's not moving, a spotter would be shifting. A disciplined spotter wouldn't, she countered, her tone respectful but firm. If we pass under that ridge, they'll have our vector. Stone stepped closer, invading her personal space. Even through the gear, she felt the aggression. We are not pausing the mission for livestock. You're here to shoot what I tell you to shoot, not to ghost hunt. Get moving. He turned his back on her, signaling the team to advance. Isabella stood frozen for a split second. The heat signature was still there. She knew with the instinct honed by 3 tours that eyes were on them. But the chain of command was a steel cable. Break it and everything falls apart. She lowered her rifle. Moving, she whispered. As they trudged forward, the gravel grinding beneath their boots sounded like gunshots in the silence. Isabella kept her scope trained on the ridge, walking sideways, waiting for the muzzle flash. It didn't come. Instead, as they passed the shadow of the cliff, she saw a single faint streak of light arc into the sky from the ridge behind them. A text message, or a low-tech signal flare masked by the valley walls. Did you see that? She asked. See what? Stone barked. Cut the chatter. Isabella swallowed the bile rising in her throat. They weren't ghost hunting. They were being herded. The city of Almirac smelled of sewage and unwashed bodies, a sharp contrast to the sterile, recycled air of the briefing room. The team moved through the alleyways in a tight stack, the silence broken only by the low hum of the Thor jammer pack, carried by the comm specialist designed to block remote detonation signals for IEDs. Isabella brought up the rear, her eyes scanning the rooftops. The feeling of being watched hadn't left her since the ridgeline. Target building, 12 o'clock, Stone whispered over the comms. The breach was soft. No explosives, just a synchronized lockpick and a silent entry. They swept the ground floor of the safe house, weapons raised, laser sights cutting through the dust motes, dancing in the ambient streetlight, filtering through boarded windows. Clear left, a SEAL murmured. Clear right. They found the asset in the back room, the high-value target. A man named Dr. Farouk was huddled in the corner, clutching a leather satchel. The air in the room was thick with the stench of stale tobacco and nervous sweat. Stone moved in first, his stature, imposing weapon lowered but ready. He pulled a high biometric scanner from his pouch. Dr. Farouk, Stone said, his voice a low growl. We are leaving, now. Farouk looked up, his eyes wide, shifting frantically between the masked men filling the small room. He shook his head, shrinking back against the peeling plaster of the wall. He began muttering in Arabic, rapid fire, and panicked. He says he's not going. The interpreter translated, sounding tense. He says the route is burned. He says they know. Tell him we are the route, Stone snapped. He stepped closer, looming over the smaller man. Get up! Farouk scrambled back, kicking at Stone's boots. No! No men, Haram, too loud. His eyes locked onto Isabella, who was standing by the door frame, her smaller silhouette less aggressive than the wall of muscle that was the SEAL stack. Farouk pointed a shaking finger at her. Her? Only her. She checks the street. Isabella stepped forward instinctively. She knew this profile fear masked as stubbornness. Commander, let me handle him. If I can de-escalate, back off, Taylor. Stone cut her off, not looking back. I don't have time to coddle a terrified asset. He's terrified of you, sir, Isabella said, her voice steady but urgent. If we drag him out screaming, we alert the whole block. Stone turned, and for a moment the NVGs hit his eyes, but the set of his jaw was visible. He was losing control of the timeline, and to a man like Stone, that was a personal failure. He viewed Isabella's intervention not as a tactical asset, but as insubordination. I said back off, Stone hissed. He turned back to Farouk and reached for the man's arm. Farouk screamed a high, piercing sound that shattered the noise discipline they had maintained for 3 hours. Shut him up, Stone barked. Isabella moved. She didn't think. She just reacted to the spiraling situation. She stepped between Stone and the target, placing a hand on Farouk's shoulder to ground him, speaking a few words of calm Arabic she'd picked up. Doctor, look at me, We are leaving. Quietly. For a second it worked. Farouk stopped screaming, his breathing hitching as he looked at Isabella's face. Then Stone snapped. With a grunt of frustration, Stone shoved Isabella hard. It wasn't a tactical repositioning. It was a shove of pure annoyance. "Get the hell out of my way, Sergeant!" Isabella stumbled back, her vest catching on a rusted table edge. The metal screeched against the floor, a loud grinding noise that echoed through the silent house. The room froze. Isabella regained her balance, her eyes locking onto Stone's. The disrespect was palpable, physical. The other SEALs looked away, uncomfortable. Stone had just put hands on a female operator in the middle of a delicate extraction. "Secure him, zip tie him if you have to. We move in 2 mics." Stone ordered, his voice tight, refusing to acknowledge what he had just done. Farouk was whimpering now, broken by the aggression, allowing the other operators to haul him up. Stone marched past Isabella, his shoulder checking hers as he exited the room. "You want to play diplomat, Taylor? You can explain to the Admiral why we missed the window." Isabella checked her weapon, her fingers white-knuckled on the pistol grip. It wasn't the shove that angered her. It was the noise, the scream, the table screeching. She looked at the interpreter. He looked back, pale. "We're loud," she whispered. "We're too loud." Stone was already at the front door, signaling the exit. "Move out! Staggered column!" Isabella took her position at the rear again. As they stepped out of the stifling heat of the safe house into the cool night air, the silence of the city felt different. It was heavier, expectant. She paused at the threshold, looking up at the sky. Thump, a distant, dull sound, like a car door closing miles away. Isabella knew that sound. Every soldier knew that sound. "Incoming!" she screamed, diving forward just as the whistle of the mortar shell tore the air apart. The world disintegrated into a brown fog of pulverized brick and shock waves. The mortar round had impacted the courtyard wall less than 30 meters away, not close enough to kill instantly, but close enough to turn the disciplined silence of the extraction into a ringing, chaotic hell. "Get off the X, move!" Stone's voice roared through the comms, cutting through the high-pitched tinnitus whining in Isabella's ears. She scrambled up from the crouch, coughing out dust that tasted of copper and ancient clay. The street ahead, their primary route, was gone, buried under a collapsed awning in a burning sedan. The ambush was initiated. "Primary route compromised," the point man Miller shouted, scanning the rooftops with his rifle. "We need a secondary. Cut through the market." Stone ordered, grabbing Dr. Farouk by the back of his collar. The HVT was dead weight, stumbling and sobbing. "We push east to the extraction point. Speed is security. Go." The team surged forward, transitioning into urban bounding overwatch. They moved like a single organism, one element covering while the other advanced, leapfrogging through the narrow, twisting alleyways of the market district. The air was thick with the acrid smoke of the mortar blast and the rising dawn heat. Isabella took the rear guard again, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every window, every doorway, every pile of trash looked like a threat. Through her scope, the city was a nightmare of angles and shadows. She saw movement on the periphery, shadows flitting across rooftops parallel to them. They were being herded. "Commander!" Isabella keyed her mic, keeping her voice level despite the adrenaline. "We have flankers. They're channeling us toward the main plaza." "I see them, Taylor!" Stone snapped back, breathless. "Keep moving. We beat them to the gap." They burst out of the alleyway and arrived at the edge of the marketplace. It was a wide-open expanse of hard-packed dirt about 50 meters across, lined by 2-story buildings on the far side. To reach the extraction zone, they had to cross it. The team halted behind the cover of a stone fountain. "Smoke out," Stone commanded. "We cross in 5. Spread formation." Isabella scanned the building line across the street. Her eyes locked onto a 2nd-story window in a corner building. The shutters were closed, but one slat was missing. Inside, deep in the shadow, there was a darkness that looked unnatural. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a void, and the geometry was perfect. It commanded the entire open square. "Hold!" Isabella shouted, her voice cracking the disciplined comms net. "Commander, 12 o'clock high, corner building, 2nd floor. That's a sniper hide." Stone paused, looking at the window. "I don't see a barrel. I don't see heat." "He's set back," Isabella insisted, dread coiling in her stomach. She remembered the humiliation in the safe house, the spit, the shove. Speaking up now was dangerous. Being wrong was career suicide, but being right? It's a textbook loophole, sir. If we step out there, we're dead. We don't have time to clear every suspicious shadow, Sergeant. Stone checked his watch. The birds are 2 minutes out. If we're not at the LEZ, they wave off. Pop smoke. Sir, please. That is a direct order. Taylor, cover our 6. Miller, take point. Go! 2 smoke grenades hissed across the pavement, spewing thick gray clouds. But the wind was picking up, thinning the screen faster than it could settle. Miller, a heavyset operator with a breaching shotgun on his back, stepped out from behind the fountain. He trusted his commander. He moved with aggression, trusting the speed. Isabella watched through her scope, helpless. She shifted her aim to the window finger on the trigger, praying she was paranoid. Miller made it 10 yards. Crack. The sound was distinct, a supersonic snap that arrived a split second before the report of the rifle. Miller's head snapped back violently. A spray of red mist hung in the air for a fraction of a second before his body crumbled to the dirt like a puppet with cut strings. "Man down!" screamed the medic. "Contact front!" The square erupted. It wasn't just the sniper. Machine gun fire opened up from the rooftops on the left, raking the ground where Miller lay. The bullets kicked up spurts of dust, inching closer to his motionless body. "Suppressing fire!" Stone roared, firing blindly toward the rooftops. "Get him! Get him now!" The team unleashed a wall of lead, the deafening roar of 5.56 rounds tearing into the mud brick. Under the cover of the volume of fire, the medic and another SEAL surged forward, grabbing Miller by his drag handle and hauling him back. They dragged him past Isabella. She saw the damage. It was bad. A neck shot. The armor hadn't saved him. "Fall back!" Stone yelled, his voice laced with a sudden frantic edge. "Into the structure on the right breach, it now." Isabella didn't move immediately. She held her ground, her scope fixed on that single window, waiting for the follow-up shot. She saw the glint, a shift in the darkness. She fired. Once. Her M110 kicked against her shoulder. The wood of the window frame splintered. She didn't know if she hit him, but the glint disappeared. "Taylor, move!" She turned and sprinted for the heavy wooden door the team had just breached. She dove inside just as a line of machine gun fire stitched across the threshold, chewing up the wood frame where her head had been a second before. The heavy door slammed shut and was barred. Darkness swallowed them, illuminated only by the frantic red beams of laser sights and the strobe of the medic's headlamp. "Status!" Stone shouted, his chest heaving. "Miller's critical." The medic said, his hands slick with blood as he packed gauze into the wound. "He's bleeding out." Isabella slumped against the wall, checking her magazine. She looked at Stone. He was staring at Miller, his face a mask of shock and rage. He looked up and his eyes met hers. There was no apology in them, only the terrifying realization that they were trapped, cut off, and the only exit was the street they couldn't cross. "We're pinned," Isabella whispered to herself. The trap had snapped shut. The air inside the dusty storeroom was thick with the copper tang of blood and the frantic, shallow breathing of a dying man. Miller lay on a cleared table, his gear cut away, his neck a mess of red foam and packing gauze. "Pressure, I need more pressure." The medic, Doc Hernandez, shouted, his hands slick and trembling. "The artery is nicked. I can't get it to clot." Isabella stood by the shuttered window, her rifle scanning the narrow slit of light that looked out onto the alley. She wasn't looking at Miller. She couldn't afford to. Her job was security. But every gurgling gasp from the table behind her tightened the knot in her stomach. "Command, this is Havoc 1. Requesting immediate casevac. We have 1 urgent surgical. Over." Stone was in the corner, screaming into the handset of his MBITR radio. Static. Just a wall of white noise. "Damn it!" Stone slammed the radio against the wall. "They're jamming the whole spectrum. We're black on comms." He turned his eyes wild, scanning the room. He needed a target for his frustration. He needed a reason why his man was dying that didn't involve his own order to cross the street. His gaze landed on Isabella. "You," Stone pointed a finger at her, marching across the small room. The other SEALs, Jones and Davis, looked up from their defensive positions, sensing the shift in the air. Isabella turned from the window, lowering her rifle slightly. Sir, don't sir me, Stone hissed, stopping inches from her face. You were on overwatch. You were supposed to suppress that window. Miller is bleeding out on that table because you hesitated. Isabella blinked the accusation, hitting her like a physical blow. It was absurd. It was a lie. Commander, I identified the threat. I warned you it was a sniper hide. You ordered the movement. I ordered you to cover the team. Stone's voice rose to a shout echoing off the bare concrete walls. If you had put rounds into that window before we stepped out, Miller would be standing here. You froze Taylor. You choked. The room went deadly silent. Even Doc paused in his work for a fraction of a second. I did not choke, Isabella said, her voice dangerously calm. I followed your rules of engagement. I followed your direct order to move. I fired the second the target presented. You're a liability, Stone spat the words out. I knew it the moment they assigned a female to this unit. You don't have the instinct. You let him get shot. That's enough, boss, Davis said from the doorway, his voice low. Let's focus on the perimeter. Stay out of this. Stone whipped around to silence Davis, then turned back to Isabella, his face flushed with adrenaline and misdirected shame. He was unraveling. The guilt of Miller's blood was eating him alive, and he was projecting it all onto the only outsider in the room. You want to play operator, Stone sneered. You're nothing but a diversity hire who got a good man killed. Isabella stared at him. She saw the fear behind his eyes. He was a drowning man trying to climb on top of her to breathe. You are compromised, Commander, she said softly. You need to sit down. The insubordination, the truth of it, snapped something in Stone. He leaned in, his lips curled in a snarl, and before anyone could react, he spat. A wet, warm glob of saliva hit Isabella squarely on her left cheek just below her eye. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the mortar fire. It was the sound of a career ending, of a brotherhood breaking. Davis stood up. Doc looked away. The shame in the room was suffocating. Isabella didn't flinch. She didn't wipe it off immediately. She let it sit there, a physical manifest of his failure. She looked at Stone, and for the first time, she didn't see a superior officer. She saw a casualty. She slowly raised her gloved hand and wiped her cheek, checking the moisture on her fingertip. Her face was a mask of stone. Are you finished, Commander? She asked. Her tone was devoid of emotion. No anger, no hurt, just ice. Stone was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He realized what he had done. He saw the looks on his men's faces. He had lost them. Get out of my sight, Stone whispered, turning away, unable to look at her. Get on the roof. Watch the north sector. If you see anything moving, you call it. Don't you dare fire unless I say so. Isabella slung her rifle. She looked at Miller, whose face was gray as ash. Keep pressure on the subclavian Doc, she said as she walked past the table. He's going into shock. She didn't look at Stone again. She walked to the rusted iron ladder leading to the roof and climbed. As she pushed open the hatch and stepped out into the blinding sunlight in the heat of the Iraqi morning, she took a deep breath. She was alone now, truly alone. The team downstairs was broken. She moved to the parapet, setting up her rifle, adjusting the parallax. She checked the wind. 3 miles per hour, left to right. She was no longer Sergeant Taylor, the attachment. She was the ghost, and she was the only thing standing between those men and death. The rooftop was a flat expanse of cracked concrete baking under the relentless hammer of the mid-morning sun. The heat shimmer was already rising, distorting the air above the parapets like oil on water. Isabella moved low, a crawl that was agonizingly slow, dragging her drag bag behind her until she reached the northeast corner. She didn't set up on the wall itself. That was a rookie mistake, a silhouette waiting to be punched. Instead, she pulled back 3 meters into the shadows of a water tank, creating a loophole through a pile of discarded cinder blocks. She set up the M110 SAS, extending the bipod legs. Next to the rifle, she placed her Kestrel 5700 Elite wind meter. The little propeller spun lazily. 4 miles per hour, full value. She pressed her eye to the scope. The world narrowed down to a 20-degree cone of magnified violence. Downstairs, she could hear the muffled sounds of chaos. Stone's voice shouting orders that sounded more like pleas. The groan of Miller. the distinctive rip of Velcro as medical pouches were torn open. It felt a world away. Up here, there was only the wind and the geometry of the kill zone. Isabella touched her cheek. The saliva had dried, but the phantom sensation of it burned hotter than the sun. She closed her eyes for a second, utilizing a technique she learned in sniper school, the box. She took the anger, the humiliation, the image of Stone's snarling face, and she visualized putting it all into a steel box. She locked the lid. She welded it shut. When she opened her eyes, her pulse was 45 beats per minute. She was no longer a woman who had been disrespected. She was a weapon system. Havoc 1 to Ghost. Stone's voice crackled in her earpiece, harsh and breathless. Status: Sector North is clear of immediate infantry. Isabella replied, her voice flat. I have movement 3 blocks out. Technicals regrouping. Copy. Keep eyes on the alley. We're prepping for a breakout. Isabella froze. Commander, repeat. Miller is fading. Stone said, the desperation leaking through the static. We can't wait for QRF. We're going to punch through to the extraction point on foot. We move in 5 mics. Isabella shifted her scope, scanning the environment. The streets were too quiet. The insurgent fire that had pinned them down 10 minutes ago had ceased completely. That wasn't a retreat. It was a setup. She scanned the rooftops along their proposed route. Nothing. No barrels. No heads. Then she saw it, a subtle shift in the environment. On the corner of the intersection, 200 meters away, a pile of trash had been moved. A fresh wire glinted in the sun, running from the debris to a storefront. And further back behind a parked truck, she saw the distinctive conical tip of an RPG-7 warhead, just barely visible. They weren't attacking the building because they wanted the SEALs to come out. It was an L-shaped ambush. The moment the team stepped into the street, they would be hit from the front and the flank. Commander, negative on the movement. Isabella said, her voice urgent but controlled. They are baiting you. I have visual on an ambush setup at the intersection, RPG teams and IEDs. If you exit now, you are walking into a kill box. You said the sector was clear, Stone snapped. The approach is clear because they want you to take it. Sir, you need to hold the perimeter. Let them come to us. We don't have time to wait, Stone yelled. Miller has maybe 20 minutes. We are moving. Provide cover fire. Commander, do not open that door. I am telling you it is a trap. And I am telling you that as a direct order, Sergeant. Do your damn job and cover the team, or I will have you court-martialed for cowardice. Out. The line clicked dead. Isabella stared through the scope. The box in her mind rattled. The temptation was there, dark and seductive. Let him go. Let him walk out that door. Let the RPG hit him. He deserves it. He brought this on himself. It would be so easy. She could just watch. She could testify later that she couldn't stop him. She looked at the RPG gunner's position. He was waiting. She looked at the door of the building below her. She heard the heavy bolts sliding back. Isabella exhaled a long, steady breath that emptied her lungs. She couldn't do it. She couldn't let them die, not even Stone. The uniform meant more than the man wearing it. She adjusted her turret. 2 clicks up, 1 click left. She reached up to her radio and turned the volume knob down until Stone's voice was just a whisper. She needed silence. Below her, the metal door groaned open. Moving! Stone shouted. Smoke grenades rolled out into the street, billowing gray clouds. Through her thermal optic, the smoke was transparent. She saw the heat signatures of her team rushing out, carrying the stretcher. She saw the heat signature of the RPG gunner rise up from behind the truck. Isabella's finger took up the slack on the trigger. The moment stretched elastic and thin, suspended between the squeeze of Isabella's trigger and the physics of the kill. Through the high magnification optic, Isabella saw the RPG gunner's muscles tense as he prepared to fire. She broke the shot. The M110 bucked against her shoulder, the suppressor emitting a sharp hiss that was lost in the sudden eruption of violence below. Her round struck the gunner in the upper chest just as he pulled the trigger. The impact threw his aim off by a fraction of a degree. Instead of hitting the center of the SEAL stack carrying Miller, the rocket corkscrewed wildly into the street, slamming into a concrete pillar 3 meters to Stone's left. Boom! The world turned white. The concussion wave slapped against the side of the building, rattling Isabella's teeth even on the roof. Dust and debris geysered into the air, instantly mixing with the white smoke grenades to create a blinding, choking nebula of confusion. Ambush right flank. Contact right. The radio was a cacophony of screaming voices. Isabella ignored them. She cycled the bolt of her rifle, ejecting the spent brass, and settled the crosshairs back on the intersection. Down in the street, chaos reigned. The explosion had knocked the entire team off their feet. Doc and Davis were scrambling in the dirt, trying to shield Miller's body with their own. They were disoriented, deafened, firing blindly into the smoke. "Get back inside! Fall back!" Davis screamed, his voice cracking. But Stone wasn't with them. Isabella shifted her scope, scanning the thermal signatures through the dust. The explosion had thrown Stone in the opposite direction, rolling him into the gutter near the ambush point. He was alive, his heat signature was glowing bright red, but he was moving sluggishly, stumbling as he tried to stand. He had lost his rifle. He was concussed, his equilibrium shattered. "Commander is isolated," Isabella stated calmly into the comms, though she knew no one was listening. 10 meters east of the breach. From the alleyway where the RPG had come from, 3 figures emerged. They moved low and fast, wearing ragtag fatigues and chemise. They weren't firing. They were sprinting towards Stone. Isabella lined up a shot on the lead insurgent. Crack. The man dropped, folded in half by the 7.62 millimeter round. She adjusted, acquired the second target. Crack. A miss. The round sparked off the pavement. The dust was too thick. She was losing visual clarity. The remaining 2 insurgents reached Stone before he could draw his sidearm. One of them smashed the butt of an AK-47 into the back of Stone's head. The commander crumbled like a sack of wet sand. Isabella's finger tightened on the trigger again, but she hesitated. The insurgents were on top of him now, grabbing his plate carrier, dragging him into the shadows of the alley. If she fired, she risked putting a round through Stone. "No shot," she whispered, the bitterness of the words tasting like ash. "No shot." Below, the rest of the team had managed to drag Miller back into the safety of the building. The heavy steel door slammed shut again, sealing them inside. They were safe, but Stone was gone. Isabella watched through the scope as the shadows swallowed the 3 men. The street fell eerily silent, save for the crackling of burning debris. The ambush had lasted less than 30 seconds. It was surgical. They hadn't wanted to kill the team. They had wanted a trophy. And thanks to Stone's arrogance, they had one. Isabella pulled her eye away from the scope. She sat back against the cold concrete of the water tank. Her breathing controlled, her heart rate steady. The radio was dead silence now. The team downstairs was reeling, leaderless, trapped with a dying man and no officer. She looked at the empty street. She pictured Stone's face, the spit, the rage, the fear. He had been a terrible leader in that moment. He had been cruel, but he was an American officer, and he carried the nuclear launch codes of the unit's operational intelligence in his head. If they tortured him, if he broke, every operator in the sector was compromised. Isabella reached up and pulled the earpiece out of her ear. She disconnected the radio from her vest and set it on the ground next to her spotter scope. She didn't need the team telling her to stay put. She didn't need Davis panicking in her ear. She stripped off her heavy plate carrier, keeping only her chest rig with the magazines, her sidearm, and her knife. She needed to be light. She needed to be fast. She picked up the M110. She checked the chamber. Brass check. Good. Isabella crawled to the edge of the roof, looking not at the street but at the adjacent buildings. The rooftops connected in a jagged line that led east toward the propaganda execution site. Intel had briefed them on days ago. She wasn't going back down the stairs to comfort the team. She wasn't going to wait for a QRF that would arrive too late. The ghost was going hunting. The sun was no longer an ally. It was a hammer beating down on the white stone of the city with a blinding intensity that washed out the shadows. Isabella moved through this glare like a wraith, her silhouette broken by the jagged lines of the ruins she traversed. She had abandoned the heavy plate carrier trading protection for speed. The M110 SAS felt lighter, but the responsibility felt heavier. She was moving east, following the tire tracks and the shouting she had heard echo off the canyon-like walls of the alleyways. She navigated the rooftops with a fluid, terrifying grace. She didn't run. Running drew the eye. She flowed. She vaulted low walls, slid across tile roofs, and crawled through holes blown in the sides of apartment complexes. Every sense was dialed to the maximum. The smell of unrefined gasoline, the distant bark of a dog, the crunch of grit beneath her boots. She paused at the edge of a bombed-out school, pressing herself into the recess of a window frame. Below, a patrol of 4 insurgents moved casually down the street, their weapons slung over their shoulders. They were laughing. They were heading toward the square. They were spectators going to a show. Isabella brought the rifle up, checking the thermal optic. The image was a wash of white and gray, thermal crossover. The sun had heated the rocks in the pavement to the same temperature as the human body, rendering the thermal sensor almost useless. She switched the optic back to day mode. She would have to do this with glass and eyeballs. She waited for the patrol to pass her, breathing shallow and rhythmic. She could have killed them all 4 shots, 4 seconds, but the noise would end the mission. She let them live. She moved on, leaping a 3-foot gap to the next roof. She was closing in on Al-Shuhada Square, a place the briefing had marked as a high-risk propaganda zone. If they were going to kill a Navy SEAL commander, they wouldn't do it in a basement. They would do it there for the world to see. 10 minutes later, she found her perch. It was a collapsed minaret, a tower of broken stone and twisted rebar that offered a commanding view of the square below 600 yards away. It was precarious, dusty, and exposed to the sun, but it provided the only line of sight that bypassed the surrounding buildings. Isabella belly crawled into the debris. She used her knife to dig a small trench in the plaster dust, creating a stable platform for the rifle's bipod. She pulled a piece of torn burlap from a nearby trash pile and draped it over her head, and the scope breaking up the outline of the weapon. She settled in. She became part of the ruin. Through the scope, the square was a stage set for a nightmare. Black flags hung from the lampposts, limp in the heat. A video camera on a tripod was set up in the center, facing a singular blood-stained kneeling mat. A small generator hummed near a parked van, powering a set of floodlights that were currently off, waiting for the main event. There were civilians gathering, men mostly, some armed, some not. They formed a loose semicircle around the camera. Isabella ranged the distance, 580 meters to the mat. Angle of inclination, -4 degrees. Wind. She glanced at the piece of plastic tied to a rebar sticking out of a wall halfway down the range. It was fluttering gently. Wind is tricky, funneling through the streets, maybe 4 miles per hour left to right, maybe gusting to 6. She dialed the elevation into her turret. She held the windage in her reticle. Then the van doors opened. 2 men dragged a figure out. He was limp, his feet dragging in the dust. They had stripped him of his gear, leaving him in his torn combat pants and a tan t-shirt that was dark with sweat and blood. A burlap sack covered his head. They threw him onto the kneeling mat. One of the men kicked him in the ribs to make him sit upright. Isabella watched through the scope, her finger resting on the trigger guard. She knew the posture. She knew the broad shoulders. It was Stone. He was alive, but barely, his head lolled forward. A third man stepped out of the van. He was dressed in clean black robes, his face covered by a pristine shema. He held a microphone in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. He wasn't a soldier. He was the executioner. Isabella adjusted her focus. The crosshairs settled on the executioner's chest. "Do it," a dark voice whispered in her mind. "Wait until the last second. Let him feel the fear he made you feel." But the soldier in her silenced the voice. This wasn't about revenge. It was about the mission, and the mission was to bring everyone home, even the ones who didn't deserve it. She inhaled. The smell of dust and old death filled her nose. The executioner reached down and ripped the hood off Stone's head. Isabella saw his face magnified 20 times. His left eye was swollen shut. His lip was split. He looked dazed, blinking in the harsh sunlight. He looked small. The executioner raised a pistol to the back of Stone's head, posing for the camera. "Not yet," Isabella whispered. "Give me the shot." She needed the executioner to step away. If she fired now, the hydrostatic shock could drive the pistol into Stone's skull. She needed separation. She waited. The world narrowed down to the beat of her heart and the crosshair floating over a black robe. The wind picked up swirling dust through the open arches of the minaret, grit stinging Isabella's eyes. She didn't blink. She couldn't afford to. Through the Schmidt and Bender scope, the image of the square was crystal clear, a terrifying tableau frozen in amber. 600 yards. Down in the square, the executioner was milking the moment. He paced around the kneeling commander, the pistol held loosely in his hand, gesturing to the camera. He was shouting something, his voice carrying faintly over the wind, a distorted rhythmic chanting that whipped the small crowd of onlookers into a frenzy. Stone was on his knees, head bowed. He looked broken. The swelling in his eye had closed it completely, and blood dripped from his chin onto the dusty mat. He was a man who had built his entire identity on control, now stripped of everything but his breath. Isabella adjusted her turret. Click, click. The wind was the enemy now. It was gusting, unpredictable channeling through the narrow streets leading into the square. A bad call on the windage would put the bullet 3 inches to the left, straight into Stone's shoulder, or 3 inches right amiss that would prompt the executioner to pull the trigger instantly. She watched the executioner's movements. He was theatrical, unpredictable. He stopped pacing and stepped in close behind Stone, grabbing a handful of Stone's hair to jerk his head back for the camera. The pistol barrel pressed against Stone's temple. Isabella stopped breathing. The reticle hovered over the executioner's face, but half of it was obscured by Stone's head. Too tight. The shot is too tight. Move, she whispered, her voice a cracked plea in the empty tower. Give me the angle. The executioner didn't move. He began to read from the papers, in his other hand, a final verdict. Isabella's mind flashed back to the briefing room, to the safe house, to the spit on her cheek. She heard Stone's voice in her memory screaming that she was a liability, that she hesitated. If I take this shot and miss, he was right. If I don't take this shot, he's dead. She tightened her grip on the stock. She shifted her aim. She couldn't go for the head, the risk of hitting Stone was too high. She dropped the crosshairs to the executioner's exposed shoulder, just past Stone's ear. It wasn't a kill shot, but it was a kinetic impact that would tear the arm off. The executioner racked the slide of his pistol. The crowd went silent. Isabella exhaled, leaning into the rifle, becoming the stone, the dust, the wind. She felt the trigger break crisp glass-like. Thud. The M110 recoiled the suppressor, barking sharply. For a second, there was nothing. The flight time of the bullet was nearly a full second. A lifetime. Then the executioner spun violently. A spray of red mist erupted behind him as the 175-grain projectile slammed into his upper right shoulder, shattering the clavicle and severing the nerves controlling his gun hand. The pistol flew from his grip. He screamed a sound that the camera microphone would pick up perfectly and collapsed backward, clutching the ruin of his shoulder. Stone jerked eyes, snapping open, confused by the sudden spray of blood that wasn't his own. The square exploded into chaos. The civilians scattered like roaches exposed to light. The 2 guards near the van raised their AK-47s, scanning the rooftops looking for the source of the thunder. Isabella racked the bolt. Target 2, the guard on the left. He was bringing his rifle up towards Stone. Crack. The guard dropped a center mass hit, dropping him instantly. The 3rd guard dove behind the van, firing blindly into the air. Stone was moving now. The shock had broken. The instinct had taken over. He threw himself forward, rolling off the mat, scrambling toward the dropped pistol. He was clumsy, his coordination wrecked by the concussion, but he was moving. Isabella scanned the perimeter. More insurgents were pouring out of the side streets, alerted by the gunfire. She was one rifle against a city. "Get up, Stone!" she hissed, firing a suppression shot near the van to keep the last guard pinned. "Get up and run!" She saw Stone grab the executioner's pistol. He didn't run. He turned back toward the man who had been about to kill him. For a second, Isabella thought Stone would execute him. Instead, Stone fired 2 rounds into the van's engine block and then scrambled toward the nearest alleyway, the one leading east, away from the team's position, but toward the industrial district. He was alive, but he was deep in enemy territory, wounded and unarmed, save for a pistol with half a magazine, and he had no idea who had just saved him. Isabella grabbed her brass. She couldn't stay here. The muzzle flash, however, suppressed, would have been spotted. She collapsed the bipod, slung the rifle, and sprinted for the rear of the roof. She had violated the ROE. She had abandoned her team to save one man, and the night was far from over. The roar of the DSHK heavy machine gun tore through the alleyway, the 12.7mm rounds chewing through the brickwork of the corner building where Stone had taken cover. Isabella was 3 rooftops away, sprinting across a corrugated tin shed that rattled violently under her boots. Her lungs burned the dry air, searing her throat like swallowed glass. She slid into position behind a low parapet, her chest heaving, sweat stinging her eyes. Below the technical, a rusted Toyota pickup with a heavy gun mounted in the bed was blocking the intersection. It was the only way out for Stone. He was pinned behind a pile of rubble, firing his stolen pistol uselessly at the vehicle's armor plating. He was trapped. "Check your background," Isabella muttered to herself, her hands moving with practiced robotic efficiency. She didn't have a clear shot on the gunner. He was shielded by the truck's cab. She shifted her aim lower. The engine block. She fired. The 7.62 millimeter armor-piercing round punched through the hood. She fired again. And again. 3 rounds in rapid succession, aiming for the fuel line or the block itself. Steam and black smoke erupted from the truck's grill. The engine sputtered and died. The gunner, realizing his platform was dead, swung the heavy barrel around, searching for the sniper. Isabella didn't give him the time. She stood up, exposing herself for a split second to get the angle and put a single round through the gun shield. The gunner slumped over the weapon. "Move, Stone!" she screamed, though he couldn't hear her over the ringing in his ears. But he saw the truck die. He saw the gunner drop. Stone scrambled up, stumbling, his gait uneven. He ran toward the open ground of the industrial lot, a designated emergency LZ landing zone marked on their maps days ago. Isabella slung her rifle and vaulted over the edge of the roof, dropping 10 feet onto a stack of pallets, then rolling to the ground. She hit the dirt running. She had to beat him to the LZ. She had to make it look like they were a team, not a rogue element saving a straggler. She sprinted through the parallel alley, bursting out into the lot, just as Stone collapsed near a rusted shipping container. He was gasping for air, clutching his ribs. Isabella slowed to a trot, feigning a tactical approach. She approached him from his 3 o'clock. "Commander," she barked, her voice breathless but authoritative. Stone whipped his head around, raising the pistol. He lowered it when he saw her. His one good eye widened in confusion. He looked at her, then back at the rooftops, then back at her. "Taylor," he rasped, blood bubbling on his lips. Where is the rest of them?" "Holding the perimeter at the safe house." Isabella lied smoothly, grabbing him by his vest straps. "We need to go. Birds are inbound. 30 seconds. You!" Stone struggled to focus. "You cleared the square." "We don't have time, sir. Move." She hauled him up. He was heavy dead weight, but she didn't buckle. She dragged him toward the center of the lot. And then the sound came, the low, thumping rhythm that every soldier felt in their marrow before they heard it. Thwack, 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 thwack. 2 MH-60 Blackhawks banked hard over the city skyline, coming in fast and low, flaring aggressively as they hit the LZ. The rotor wash kicked up a brownout, a blinding storm of sand and trash that stung their skin. The door gunners on the lead bird unleashed a torrent of minigun fire into the tree line surrounding the lot, suppressing any insurgents thinking of taking a pot shot. "Go, go!" the crew chief screamed, waving them forward. Isabella shoved Stone toward the open door. He scrambled inside, collapsing onto the metal floor. She followed, diving in just as the pilot pulled pitch. The helicopter lurched upward, banking hard to the right to gain altitude. Isabella sat on the edge of the bench seat, her legs dangling for a moment before she pulled them in. She leaned back against the bulkhead, closing her eyes. The vibration of the airframe rattled her bones. Across from her, Stone was being attended to by the flight medic. They were cutting off his shirt, checking the concussion, wiping the blood from his face. He pushed the medic's hand away. He looked across the cabin at Isabella. The noise was deafening, making speech impossible without headsets. But the look on his face spoke volumes. It wasn't gratitude. It was a piercing, confused suspicion. He looked at her rifle, the dusty suppressor, the heat radiating off the barrel. He looked at the lack of other team members. He realized she hadn't come from the safe house. She had come from the fight. He pointed at her, mouthing a question. Isabella stared back, her face a mask of exhaustion. She didn't respond. She simply reached up, pulled her eye pro down over her eyes, and turned her head to look out the window at the burning city shrinking below them. She had done her job. The debt was paid. The air in the Joint Operations Center, JOC, was freezing chilled to a sterile 65 degrees that felt alien after the furnace of Al-Marak. The hum of servers and the low murmur of analysts replaced the chaotic noise of battle. Sergeant Isabella Taylor sat at the long mahogany table, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. She had showered, scrubbing the cordite and dried blood from her skin, but the smell of the safe house seemed to linger in her sinuses. She wore fresh fatigues, her rank insignia crisp on her chest. Across the table, Lieutenant Commander Stone sat like a statue carved from bruised granite. His arm was in a sling, his left eye covered by a thick white bandage. He stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the large monitor on the wall or at the woman sitting opposite him. "Let's review the extraction timeline," Admiral Holloway said from the head of the table. He was a man of few words, his eyes sharp as flint. "Commander Stone, your initial report stated that the team was pinned by a complex ambush. You were separated and subsequently fought your way to the secondary extraction point." "That is correct, Admiral," Stone said, his voice raspy. "I utilized a captured weapon to effect my escape. We have the drone feed from the Predator circling at 18,000 feet. The J-2 intelligence officer interrupted, tapping a keyboard. The screen flickered to life. The grainy black and white thermal footage showed the square, the execution mat, the kneeling figure of Stone. Isabella watched impassively. She saw herself in the footage not as a person, but as a heat signature in the minaret, a ghost in the machine. "At 0535 Zulu," the intel officer narrated, "the executioner is neutralized. One shot, upper thoracic." On the screen, the executioner spun and dropped. "Ballistics analysis confirms a 7.62 millimeter match-grade projectile." The officer continued, glancing at Isabella. "Trajectory traces back to the minaret 600 yards north-northwest. That is Sergeant Taylor's position." The room went silent. The Admiral looked at Stone. "The report says you were engaging with a 9mm pistol, Commander. This footage shows a sniper kill." Stone's jaw tightened. A vein throbbed in his neck. He had written the report to save face, to make it sound like a mutual extraction. But the data didn't lie. He had been on his knees seconds from death, and the woman he had humiliated, the woman he had spat on, had saved him against direct orders to hold fire. "Sergeant Taylor," the Admiral turned to her, "did you have a green light to engage?" Isabella looked at the Admiral, then shifted her gaze to Stone. This was the moment. She could bury him. She could mention the "do not engage" order. She could mention the spit. She could burn his career to the ground right here in front of the flag. Stone finally looked at her. His single good eye held a mixture of defiance and fear. He knew he owed her a debt he could never pay. "The commander was compromised, Admiral," Isabella said, her voice steady and cool. "The ROE allows for the immediate defense of friendly forces when under imminent threat of death. I made the call." She didn't mention the order to stand down. She didn't mention the chaos. She framed it as a textbook decision, stripping it of the drama, stripping Stone of the need to defend his failure. The Admiral studied her for a long moment. He knew. Men like him always knew. "Good shot, Sergeant," the Admiral said quietly. "Damn good shot." He closed the folder. "Commander Stone, you're on medical leave until that eye heals. Sergeant Taylor, you're reassigned to Task Force 88. They need shooters who can think. Dismissed." Isabella stood up immediately, snapping to attention, then turned on her heel to leave. She walked down the long, linoleum-lined hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She wanted a cigarette, though she didn't smoke. She wanted to sleep for a week. "Taylor." She stopped but didn't turn around. She heard the heavy, uneven footsteps of Stone approaching behind her. He stopped 3 feet away. "You disobeyed a direct order," Stone said. His voice was low, lacking the venom it had carried in the field. It sounded hollow. Isabella turned slowly. "I did." Stone struggled with the words. He was a man built on pride, and that foundation had been cracked. He looked at the floor, then at her boots, then finally with great difficulty at her face. He looked at the spot on her cheek where he had spat on her 24 hours ago. "The report? Thanks for keeping it clean," he muttered. It was the closest thing to an apology he was capable of. "I owe you a beer." Isabella looked at him, and she felt nothing. No anger, no vindication. Just the cold professional distance of a soldier looking at a civilian. He wasn't her commander anymore. He was just a man who had panicked when she hadn't. "You don't owe me anything, Commander," she said softly. "I didn't take the shot for you." Stone frowned, confused. Then why? Because the trident you wear belongs to the Navy, Isabella said, adjusting the strap of her bag. And I wasn't going to let the enemy have it. She didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked away, her boots echoing rhythmically down the empty corridor, leaving him standing alone in the sterile white light, alive but utterly defeated.